Let's talk a little bit today about containers. The new technology kid on the block, effectively, even though not really all that new. And actually, more importantly, I don't want to talk so much about containers, although I'll just briefly touch on how containers are being used in the development community, because it's a large part of what's driving their interest. But more, the question is, how do I actually operate the infrastructure that all sits on top of? Now, the DevOps community will tell you containers are the best thing since sliced bread because it simplifies the operational aspects that they have to deal with. And this is quite true. Suddenly, I only have to focus on the specific libraries or supporting packages that actually enable the containers that I want to use, the particular application space that I want to use. I don't have to deal with the security of the SSH infrastructure, for example, to get access to the underlying physical operating system, or many of the other components that would be entailed in actually managing a full end-to-end system. I only have to focus on my particular libraries and binaries. The other real benefit of containers from a developer perspective is the potential speed by which they can be launched. A container can be launched in basically milliseconds, the time it takes to start a process within the Linux kernel, whereas an actual operating system takes the entire time of launching all these different processes, making sure the interactions all work, the network services are available, the device drivers are talking to the right devices, etc. So there's a lot longer time to launch a virtual machine than it is to launch a container. Now, again, this is a real benefit from the developer perspective because they can actually now test their application in the equivalent of the real live environment, whether it's on their laptop or in a production cloud somewhere, without really having to make any changes at all to the system that they are managing and manipulating. So their operations becomes much simpler. But this does add a whole nother complexity component to operating an environment in which these containers can live. Most containers are not single container applications, or most applications are not single container applications. They're made up of a bunch of different little microservice components that might all be implemented as separate containers, and they all would want to potentially scale to address systems load. Now, many systems don't actually have to scale in the larger sense of the word because they are single system environments. But that scaling does come into play in some environments and some applications, and being able to support that without adding additional operational complexity is part of what the container management space is starting to take on. Now, this is tools like Kubernetes, which manages containers, Docker Swarm, which manages containers, things like Rancher is a new product that actually does this. There are some older technologies that have been around a little bit longer, like OneOps, which just got released as an open source project, or the Mesos environment and their DCOS management bundle that are also taking on the task of how do I manage these environments. So this management aspect is another one. So somebody still needs to operate that application space. Of course, yet another piece that needs to be maintained and monitored and managed. Also, there's the question of how do I actually get the whole system installed to begin with. In order to run Kubernetes, I have to install a number of supporting services. I actually have to get the Kubernetes code, the latest version installed. How do I deal with upgrades? All of those management processes do not disappear when I suddenly go to containers. They're just shifted to a different management environment. So some folks say, oh, well, look, we've really been doing a lot of work with OpenStack, which we as a consultancy have been doing. Why don't we just use OpenStack to manage the containers that are getting deployed either from the application perspective or things like deploy Kubernetes in OpenStack? Well, I've actually now started to see the inverse of that coming along. People saying, look, deploy the container environment and then deploy a management service like OpenStack as an application in the container environment. So we're starting to see these things kind of go back and forth. The final answer is not there yet, and it probably depends on the scale of the environments that you're trying to run, what your end customers need most of, i.e. are you mostly doing infrastructure services, or are you mostly doing container services, or are you mostly doing virtual machines that are individually managed as pets? So maybe even OpenStack is not the right solution. You should just be using LX or libvirt-based infrastructure on KVM or even VMware for that matter. Lots of questions that still come up, but the real interesting thing I find is that there's a new shift in how I manage and look at what my infrastructure might need to look like, specifically the management of infrastructure management as applications. So there's a little bit of a sort of dog chasing its tail kind of an issue here, but I think that that's going to be resolved, and there are going to be a number of solutions available for end users to actually consume to resolve that. Things like the Kubernetes space, the Mesos DCOS, OneOps, CoreOS as Tectonic technology. There's HashiCorp with Terraform. Lots of these technologies that are specifically looking at managing the infrastructure as code, which is what a lot of the DevOps folks talk about, but really managing the infrastructure to manage the applications all of those different things as different code domains, different operational domains. So this is a new view of the environment. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this evolves over the next number of months and years. So stay tuned for the next episode. We'll start to dive into each of these different technologies and start to consider what they might mean for you, how you might actually apply them to your particular environment.